Lord. And we thank God for you, sir, and for your expertise that you will lend indeed to this conversation. Next, we want to thank God for Ebony Walker Sherrilus that is with us. And she is indeed a child counselor. Woman of God, certainly it's a pleasure to have you on the Bishop's Corner. Before we should go into our program tonight, and yes, once again, we are dealing with grace and forgiveness. Grace and forgiveness. But before we should really go into the program, we'll be asking you just to feast your eyes on this trailer that we want to present to you at this time. Dr. Phil, it's in your hands.
Unfortunately, the link isn't working, Bishop.
Okay, so then we'll just go on with the questions. And the first questions that we want to put forth tonight, and I want to direct that first of all to Pastor Jean Price, and then the panel can just weigh on in with their questions pertaining to that question is this. Pastor Jean,
yes.
What are the traits of someone who has experienced sexual abuse? The traits, please.
But thank you again for having me on. It's a great opportunity and it's an honor. And I greet everyone tonight and those that are listening. But some of the traits coming from firsthand experience and going through sexual abuse have been anxiety, depression, withdrawal, different things that I've endured. Most importantly, that one of the things I went through that was really, really a big thing in my life was fear. I remember being afraid of everything. And another thing that because my stepfather was not just, he didn't just sexually abuse me, he also physically abused me. And I can remember one time that he always made sure that there was always no one in my home most of the time when he sexually abused me. So I lived in a constant state of fear, never knew at what point he was going to try to do something to me. But I also went through withdrawal. Withdrawal was a big thing and no one ever noticed the signs. And I think that was one of the key points, is that it's so important to notice the signs, what's going on with the child. It might not always mean that the person's being sexually abused, but there's some key indicators and traits and signs that you definitely go through when you're being abused.
Okay, great. Questions?
In terms of, God bless you, Bishop, to the panel, amen, and to our special guests. Pastor Price, you mentioned fear being one of the main things that you had to endure. And we know that fear is something that's very powerful. It's crippling. Fear can captivate you in a negative manner. How did you overcome fear, or have you overcome that fear yet?
It took a long time, and I'm pretty sure the other panelists will kind of touch on this. The way my mindset was wired, I carried it. No matter where I went, I carried it into my marriage. I carried it into me teaching and learning, as we kind of talked on last week with my raising my children. I carried it with me wherever I went. Now, I understand the word of God says that he hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but power, love, and a sound mind. That was a constant fight for me, understanding that God didn't give that to me. So then that way I can get rid of it. I didn't have to keep taking ownership of something that I adopted. It became a way of life. So one of the key points in getting rid of it was counteracting. When it would come up, I would challenge myself. If I was afraid to go down the street, of giving an example, I would challenge myself, do the total opposite of that. Now, my husband would probably kind of say something a little different, only because, like, say we go on vacation. Jean, why are you so afraid of the water? So there's different things, Pastor, that I still at different times have to overcome. But for the most part, I would challenge myself.
Good evening, everyone. I want to give honor to our bishop, our moderator. Thank you so much for always doing such an excellent job in facilitating and overseeing what we're doing here on the Bishop's Corner weekly. I want to greet my co-partners as far as the panel, Apostle Rojas, Pastor Mackenzie, and Bishop Wolliston. And a big greeting to our Pastor Jean Price, Ebony Walker Cherilus, I hope I said that correctly, and Frank Coppola, who I had the pleasure of meeting. God bless you. It's such an honor tonight to talk about a subject which is sexual abuse. It's an awesome subject that we do need to address, especially as a body of Christ, because it happens so frequently, not just in the world, but also in the church, and people don't want to talk about it. So I am really grateful, for the Bishop's Corner and that we're opening this conversation. And so I want to ask you, Pastor Price, because I'm reading a particularly great book called Childhood Disrupted, and it was written by Donna Jackson Nakazawa. And she talks about the fact that adversity in childhood can be the precursor to deep depression and anxiety that happens later on in life. And she pointed out that a growing body of research shows that there's a close correlation between adverse childhood experiences and emotional health disorders in your adulthood. And so I want to ask you if that's something that you personally struggled with and how you overcame it, because if the study does show that it does affect you in your adulthood, that's got to be a challenge. And so did you have to face that? And if so, how did you overcome those statistics and the way in which your brain is affected? Because she does go on to say that stress and adversity consistently, when you're living in that state of fear, it does affect the cells in your brain. It affects the shape and the size of your brain. And then as you begin to mature into adulthood, it's very difficult for you to manage your emotions as well as your reactions and how you function and how you manage stress. And so can you talk to us a little bit about that and let us know how you overcame that? Because you're such a perfect example. You've overcome so many obstacles being a successful pastor, but we want to draw from that wealth of information and that overcoming power that you have.
Dr. Francis, thank you for that question. But yes, I took it right into adulthood. I didn't realize that PTSD, when I would go and teach it, I always thought it had to do with people being in the service, so forth. But I didn't realize that that was part of my life as well. And I took that anxiety. I used to have panic attacks. My husband, I would wake him up in the middle of the night. I was always at the emergency room. In my mind, feeling, and in my physical body, there was something going on with me. So I carried it right into adulthood. It wasn't until, I have to tell you, I had some key components. Having somebody to listen to me. And I remember it was one of the ministers in our church years ago, and I would call her up, having somebody to be able to talk about what was going on. Because when you're going through that, people think, and I'll just speak for me personally, some people thought I was crazy because there's nothing physically wrong that the doctors can find, but you're feeling physical things that's going on in your body, such as Frank mentioned, headaches, all kind deep, trying to breathe, shortness of breath, your heart is palpitating. So I carry that right into my adulthood. And the way that I was able to conquer it is that I had to face it.
Wow.
It wasn't going to go anywhere. And I think one of the things that was stopping me was that I didn't want to face it. But it wasn't until I stood flat foot. And when the panic attack would happen, I would talk myself right through, okay, relax, you're going through, you're having that moment. But before that, I would just go right with it. And I would go down that street exactly with it. But I learned how to come against it by speaking to it. And that's how I got through it.
That's great. Wow. To God be the glory. Ebony, I have a question for you. When you're dealing with children, did you find that in your experience, children who experience these adversities and these early childhood traumas, did they also have issues with, altering in their ability to process emotion and their ability to manage stress?
Yes, definitely. It has a major effect on emotion, a major effect on development in general, and how children actually process situations. So being exposed to any type of trauma at an early age is going to, restructure the brain and how we respond. And with sexual abuse specifically, there are plenty of physical, emotional, as well as behavioral changes that children will go through. So I did want to get into, some of the physical signs that you may see with children in terms of behavior. And this may be a sign that they are a victim of abuse.
Okay.
So they eat less than usual. They might have trouble sleeping, of course, soiling, wetting the bed.
Wow.
Now, if they previously wet the bed and increase amount of times that they're wetting, physical pain, so stomach aches, itching in their genitalia, underwear torn, stained, rectal bleeding, odors, or not wanting to bathe. Lots of times children will not want to attract their offender. So they will start not upkeeping themselves because they feel that this is going to disgust the offender in a way that they will not want to attack them any longer. And then the more prevalent signs, obvious signs would be, teen pregnancy, STDs at an early age. So this would be more obvious. Some of the behavioral signs, it would be regression. So children will revert back and start to act younger than their actual chronological age. They will start to fear being touched. As I said earlier, avoidance of familiar people that they once liked being around, delinquent behaviors. So there are lots of changes that staff may see in school, refusal to change for gym.
Wow.
The list goes on and on. And then emotionally, definitely post-traumatic stress disorder is very prevalent. Substance use maybe be their form of coping. Young people aren't able to recognize, what's going on, and they have poor coping mechanisms. So they may start at an early age using substances. Isolation from their peers, but definitely it is a big shift, that you will notice.
Wow. And so there's not really one indicator. There are many indicators. Yeah. Wow. Frank, I have a question for you, because in my research, I found out that MRIs can be very revealing about people who've been through early childhood trauma, and that children raised in foster care or even orphanages, because of the early childhood trauma that they've experienced, they have much smaller brains than others. And they're saying that that's a reduction in the gray matter, which is made up of the brain cells, as well as the white matter and the nerves. And unfortunately, stress has a great deal to do with that. And it even affects their frontal lobes. And can you explain to us how the stresses and what happens to children, the trauma in their early childhood, how that really connects? Because based on my research, it appears that your body keeps track even if you don't think it is.
Yeah, so, what happens with trauma in general is that it perceives, it's a trigger. It triggers memories of threats that have happened in the past, and those memories begin to live as if they are real.
Wow.
So the brain itself is constantly remaining in a state of hypervigilance, and it's suppressing the memory and the impulse control around it, and it traps the individual in a state of strong emotional reactivity. So what's happening, and I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't really go through it in detail, but from what I gather, the amount of energy that it takes to fight off these strong emotional issues are affecting the brain cells. And as it continues to do that, I think it has to do with just a hyper focus in those areas, which actually begins to shrink the brain. I do believe that what happens is that when they can begin to pinpoint those areas of the brain that are affected, there are ways amongst them, talk therapy, as well as medication or supplements, that when they're applied, the brain begins to expand a bit, for lack of a better term.
Wow.
Again, I'm not a doctor here, so I'm just giving you the whole area, but psychological and emotional trauma is damage, and the injury to the psyche after living through an extremely frightening and distressing event results in challenges to functioning and coping normally with the event. So as a child, you know, I've been in situations of known situations where people have just kind of block off that memory, but it doesn't mean that they're cognizant of what's going on, but the reaction to what's going on will start to show up.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's why what Pastor Price said is really significant, because trying to suppress the memory or deal with the triggers, which is you reliving the memory over and over again, that's why you're causing your brain more damage than good. Because then I also read that your brain, unfortunately, the response to stress, especially with early childhood trauma, is that it develops inflammation and turns into something called microglia. And microglia basically starts killing off your brain cells. And actually, that's what makes you have or develop the inability to deal with emotional issues, psychological issues. And so that's why what Pastor Price said is so vital as far as facing it and dealing with it so that it no longer triggers your body to react in that way. So thank you again. Thank you, Pastor Price, Frank, and Ebony. Thank you for answering.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Very, very, very interesting questions. Very good.
You're welcome.
Okay, if not, let me just weigh in. Pastor Price, did you have a fear of men? Did you have a fear of men after this attack? And the reason why I do ask that is because there's a mass in the brain known as the amygdala, which gets overstimulated when something like this happens. Okay, and people that you normally didn't fear, you begin to fear because it's a way of protecting you. So did you have a fear of men, people who you really shouldn't fear after this took place?
No, I didn't really have a fear of men. I had a fear of the man that did it to me, but I didn't have a fear of men. But I must say, Bishop, that if I saw somebody that even resembled my stepfather, then I would feel the fear and the anxiety come up. But men themselves, no, I didn't have a fear of men.
Okay. Anybody else? If not, let's go to part 2 of question number 1. Remember, question number 1 was, what are the traits of someone who has experienced sexual abuse? And what are some of the key indicators that abuse is happening in the home or community? Pastor Price, what are some of the key indicators that abuse is happening in the home or a community?
I think that Ebony kind of hit on it really well as far as the different things that children go through when you can pick up the signs that kind of go on. And again, I kind of take it from my own personal experience of my signs that I kind of went through. When I got to the point where one of the key indicators for me, when I knew I had to get out of it, I ran away from home. So when I did that, believe it or not, that got everybody's attention. It wasn't the peeing in the bed. It wasn't the depression. It wasn't the anxiety. It wasn't until I ran away from home and then they're like, well, what's wrong? So there were definitely some key indicators, as Ebony so well put, but the one that really got the attention of my family is when I finally ran away.
When you finally ran away. Questions, please. Okay, let me be the first to ask then. Pastor Price, what would you say some of the physical signs of abuse? Physical.
Again, physical signs of a girl is, and going through different things in her body, those were some of the physical signs. Then again, for me, a physical sign was that, again, my stepfather he has hit me in my face. And I went through those kinds of signs as well. Other physical signs with some people, in some of the research I've done, is cutting. Some people cut, as a way of hurting themselves because they're hurting on the inside. So those were some of the physical signs that are out there that people do definitely go through. So, I mean, it depends on, I guess it kind of depends on, I don't want to get too graphic into it, but it depends on the physical body, whether it's a young boy or girl, that, some of the physical signs that they can go through.
Ebony, what would you say are some of the behavioral signs that you see when someone is experiencing this?
So definitely withdrawal, that fear of being touched. Young kids, it may be excessive sexual play with toys. So or talking about sexual intimacy more. So it would be behaviors that are unusual for a child, of a particular age, or that are unusual to a specific child. It may be public masturbation, things of that manner. And it's due to them having had a previous exposure. Kids may even start to act out, and replay and recount the times in which they were abused. So recognizing these signs is important. They may not physically, speak to you and communicate the abuse, but being aware of those telltale signs is important.
Would you also say that regression?
Definitely, yes. Regression is definitely a big part of it. And a lot of people will overlook that sign. They will look at it as, kids just having an issue in behavior or, developmental issues. But it can be a sign that they have been sexually abused.
What if a child has difficulty in removing their clothes while taking a shower? Does that play a part also in it? They are ashamed to take their clothes off?
Yes, as I touched on earlier, it may not necessarily be shame, but definitely they may refuse to bathe because they feel that it will not attract their offender.
Okay. Let me just ask Pastor Jane this question. Pastor Jane, what are some of the emotional signs?
Yeah, I was thinking, and that's such a good question. Nightmares was a big emotional sign. Just those tormenting thoughts, those tormenting replays or triggers, just that constant replay going through your mind. And another emotional sign too is being very clingy. I was very clingy to my mother, and she didn't understand why, but she rejected my clinginess as if, I'm just trying to cling. She didn't understand why I was clinging. And because my stepfather threatened me so much that he would kill my mother, I couldn't even explain to her, Mommy, this is why I'm doing that. So emotionally, I was very clingy. I talked about withdrawal, things like that. But nightmares was a biggie. That tormenting, it was definitely torment, a lot of emotional torment for me.
So let me ask you this question. How did you see yourself? Did you your self-image at that particular time when you were experiencing that?
I didn't see myself. I didn't think that I was worth anything. I didn't see myself as even, what I would always say, Bishop, I didn't feel like I mattered. So therefore, because I didn't feel I mattered, I felt like I was invisible. And that's why when people realized something was going on was when I finally ran away, because I just felt like I was totally invisible and nobody cared.
Okay. Did you ever at any time consider suicide?
Yes, sir. Most definitely. Because I felt that was the only way out. I thank God I never went through with it, but in your mind and when you're going through it, you just feel that that's the only way out.
God bless you, young lady. God bless you. Questions?
Yeah, Ebony, thank you so much for joining us, and we truly appreciate the work that you're doing. My question to you is, are teachers trained nowadays to look for signs, signs outside of physical abuse? Because if a child is clothed, obviously you can't see, scars and so forth and so on. But are teachers trained nowadays to look for signs of abuse, emotional abuse and so forth, seeing that a teacher spends so much time a day with a child or with a student?
Yes, definitely. They have started to implement more and more within the school system, different training in order to assist them in recognizing abuse. And they are mandated reporters. So if they do ever have a concern that a child is being abused, they are obligated by law to make a call and initiate an investigation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, let me just put this question to Ebony, to Pastor Jean, and also to Frank. Signs that an adult may be hurting a child. What are some of the signs that an adult might be hurting a child?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, I would think it has to do with some sort of personality change that they are going through. They seem different than the person they would normally be, or they're agitated, they get angry, they get anxious, they get moody. Many times they'll isolate, they'll withdraw. You could say poor self-care, but ultimately I think it's in that arena where they just seem different than other people. I mean, that has to do with just a feeling that something is not really right.
Anybody else?
One of the things, if I may chime in dealing with the person that's hurting the child, is that they try to get the child to feel sorry for them in some kind of way. It's almost like it's manipulation. It's playing on the emotions. It's going into those sensitive areas with the child, just playing on that and crossing boundaries. Just having that mindset and that way of just getting into that child, just breaking that wall down is another way to me that, I'm dealing with a perpetrator.
That's a really good point. Manipulation. That's a really good point.
Yes, definitely. Manipulation is definitely part of it. And it's really all about, when we look at sexual abuse, a lot of people think it's about the actual sexual behavior, but just like domestic violence, it's really about that power and control for the offender. So lots of times, we need to pay attention to, their behavior patterns. If they are becoming intimidating, to that particular child. Or you may see some of the grooming signs where they are catering to them a lot more. Maybe they're gifting this particular child a lot more. The child becomes upset and they're purchasing them tokens of appreciation. These are signs, this is their way of quieting that child. So paying attention to those signs.
Back, going on what you're saying, Ebony, I find that a lot of these people have their characteristics is that they're very charming. They can be, they can really appear to be really just wonderful and charming, and at the same time, like what happened with Pastor Jean, that they can be extremely abusive when they're out of the limelight.
Yes, definitely.
And we also, please go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say that it's definitely how they have a school, because not only are they grooming the children, but lots of times they're grooming the parents that are involved as well.
Yeah, sure.
So they'll become really friendly with you, maybe offering to assist you in ways with the kids, offering to babysit, offering to come over more and assist you with, maybe completing chores around the house, things like that, where you take it as, oh, they're just being nice and friendly. And eventually you start to accept them in as part of the family when all along you have a hidden agenda.
Okay. And we see this definitely with the Roman Catholic Church. They have a tremendous amount of schools and they are the teachers and so forth. And it does definitely happen. So what we are saying isn't something strange. This is indeed reality. If there are no more questions, then we can go on to question number 2.
I have a question.
Of course, please. Please.
Concerning Pastor Price, by being overprotective based on your personal experience, can that put relationships in jeopardy? Case in point, there was a woman that she experienced sexual abuse, and now she was overprotective of her children, which is obvious. And so the kids were over at the mother's house, and she called the kids to find out who was in the room with them, or who they were sleeping with, and so forth. And the brothers, which is the children's uncle, overheard the conversation, and they were offended. And the relationship between her and her brothers, now they're not on speaking terms, because there was like, how dare you think such a way or in such a manner? Is there a fine line, or is there a balancing act in being protective and being over suspicious or paranoia, that now you feel everybody is about to do the same, which may not be the case, but again, you don't want to take chances.
Right.
So how do you orchestrate that?
Well, the basis for me, Bishop, Apostle, which that's such a great point, was the underpinning was fear, because you're afraid that what happened to you would happen to your children, and I have had relationships be altered because of my stand that I had to make. My children couldn't sit, because I have 3 daughters. They couldn't sit on people's laps. I did not allow people to pick my girls up, but they didn't understand, because how do you, to your point, you don't want anybody to think that you're accusing them, because nobody's walking around with perpetrator on their forehead. But then you have a responsibility, at least I felt I did, to protect my children, because I wasn't protected. So I felt mine was even greater because of what I went through. But fear was the underpinning for me, because I was afraid that, God forbid, I didn't want anything to happen to my daughters. So it's a very fine line. And I ran the risk of relationships being altered because of that. But I was willing to do that to protect my children.
I'd like to, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dan.
No, go ahead.
I'd like to say something about me personally and my mom. When I grew up, very oddly, my mother really, she never really held me. Okay, I'm not complaining. I'm just giving you fact. And whenever I would, bring girlfriends around, she had only praises for me. But when she got around me, she in many ways kept a distance. It wasn't until years and years and years later that I found out that she was kidnapped when she was 14 and sexually abused. And the reason she kept her distance from me, she didn't want anybody to look at me as though I was of value to her, and she was afraid I would be kidnapped. And it wasn't until years later that I completely understood my mother's reaction. But the effect for something like that is truly traumatic, and just like what Pastor Jean is talking about. And this is a situation I never knew that this took place, so it was confusing to me.
So I wanted to comment, because I realized, based on what Pastor Price said and what Frank said, excellent question, Apostle Rojas. Because I think it's a question that everyone needs to ponder or think about it, because your early biology of what happens to you in your life affects your relationships as you mature into adulthood. And despite the fact that if something happened to you and you are overprotective of your children, I'm sorry, as far as I'm concerned, there's no such thing as overprotecting your children. I'm sorry, as far as I'm concerned, because a predator can be a pastor, a predator can be a counselor, a predator can be an uncle, a predator can be a brother, a predator can be a cousin, a predator can be any person that has that thought when the opportunity presents itself and their flesh or the lust of their flesh takes over because of that opportunity that has now presented itself. And not to make light of it, but I want to bring back, there's a movie, one of my favorite movies called The Color Purple. And I love Oprah Winfrey's role in that movie. And one of the key things that she said that people to this day, especially women who advocate for sexual abuse victims, one of the lines that she says in the movie is that a girl child ain't safe in a family of men's. And then she says, I fought my uncles, I fought my brothers, I fought my fathers. And it was very enlightening to me, because it's amazing how we as parents or as people, we're not educated on sexual abuse to the point that, to me, I'm sorry, Apostle Rojas, but I don't think that anyone should be offended if you want to check on the well-being of your children, because it happens. I believe last week, our Pastor Price gave us that kind of insight information on statistics. It happens every 9 seconds. They talked about it at the onset of the of the film. I mean, if you think about that, that is quite alarming, and that's scary. And if those statistics are true, and they are, then we should be doing everything that we can to protect our children. And if that means that if your children come to my house and you want to call me and find out what the sleeping arrangements are and make sure that your children are okay in my house, I don't have a problem with that, because I want to protect your children also. And that should be universal. And so when we get to the point that we're taking it personal, we're being selfish and we're not caring for our children the right way. And I don't think that's the right mindset. And that's why programs like this are very important. And the conversation needs to be universal, that we all need to protect our children.
Dr. Heather, I totally agree with you, and I understand where you're coming from. I also understand where the apostle's coming from. I'm not speaking for him, but let's deal with the facts here. We're not around our kids 24/7. They spend a whole lot of time at school, after school, gymnastics. And we heard Simone Biles, we heard the whole, now it's the, Tennis Federation, or it's just mind-boggling when you think about it. I'm not an expert in this area, but I think the best tool we have going for us is, number one, education, educate ourselves, number one. And number two, have the conversations with our children at a very, very early age. I think because they're away in school for 8 hours, 12 hours, they're doing after school soccer or whatever they're doing. You know, we don't know what they're involved in. We don't know who's a predator amongst them. But what I'm saying is, if we have the conversation very early and you tell your little daughter, your son, the do's and don'ts, don't touch here, what have you, I think that's the way we can start. I'm not an expert, but, you know, overprotective, I understand, but we can't do it 24/7. We can't do it when we send them to Sunday school, to church, to youth service. We just can't be there as a parent 24/7.
Well, we can't. I do have to interject. I'm sorry. But that mindset, I hate to say this, but that mindset is why children do get attacked, and the children do become prey, because it doesn't matter if you have the conversation or not. You have to remember that it's normally, the predator is normally someone who is in an authoritative position and someone who uses manipulation to get that child to keep their mouth shut, because your mother might get killed, your family might be hurt, because the person, 9 times out of 10, the person that is is the predator is someone that everyone trusts, is someone that unfortunately, no disrespect to you, Bishop Wolliston, but they'll say, listen, if you tell your father, Bishop Wolliston, I am going to run him over with my truck, I'm going to meet him tonight, and I am going to take him out. Your children love you. They are not going to say anything if your life is going to be at stake, because they're going to protect mommy and daddy. And I know Ebony can sanction me on this. Children will want to protect their own parents if a predator is threatening them. They're not going to say anything to you. I don't care if you know the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. They're not saying nothing to you. I don't care how wonderful a parent you are. That child is going to say, I am going to protect mommy and daddy, because if I open my mouth, something is going to happen to mama. He told me he's going to kill my mama if I say something. And because of that, a lot of children are silent because they think they're protecting their parent, or they take on that responsibility. And it's not fair. But I know Ebony can speak to that because she's probably faced that.
Yes. So definitely all of what you're saying, I've seen, and a lot of reasons why children do not want to disclose it is because it's an authoritative figure, or that they have not been, taught by adults. The thing that we usually say to our kids, coming up, you respect adults, you respect and you obey these authority figures. So when it comes to these types of situations, they feel, this adult told me that it was okay to do this. It was okay to engage in this act or to keep this a secret. So they feel that they have to listen, they haven't been taught to have autonomy over their own bodies, when, uncle or cousin or grandma comes over, give them a hug, or you better say hi and things like that. But children know, they get cues and vibes from people. So if they are hesitant and they don't want to embrace this particular person, allow them that autonomy, to be able to say, no, this is my body. I don't want to hug you, but definitely being able to educate them is important. Letting them understand it's okay to say no. You have the right to say no if you feel uncomfortable regarding anything that someone is telling you to do or engage in. You have the right, teaching them how to stay safe, teaching them, that there are no secrets, no tiny secrets, no little white lies when it comes to, your parents. If you are in a situation where you are uncomfortable, or if you have been abused, to immediately tell someone that you feel safe with as soon as you have the chance.
So Ebony, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
So I understand fear and the manipulation. I do understand that. I get it. But you are saying we should at least, or someone should at least have the conversation with the child.
Definitely.
You are saying that.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I'm in complete agreement with that. Because there's no way that we can completely protect them. The only thing we can do is equip them with those tools, and continue to pray for their safety. And that's all we can do. I do think it is important, that we are aware of our children's caregivers. So when they're not with us, if they are going to someone's house, it's okay. Maybe you want to visit that house first and see where they're sleeping before you allow them to stay over. Maybe you want to know who's going to be in this home, while they're there. Are there going to be adults there? Who are these adults? Are you familiar with those adults? So it's okay to want to keep your child safe in these ways. So definitely, that's something I would recommend.
So I have a question in terms of having the conversation, because we spoke about earlier that a lot of our children, they don't talk. Children, young adults, you can't get them to open up for various reasons. Some of the reasons we just discussed a while ago. And many times when we can't get our young people to open up, we prejudge them and say that they're rude, they're obnoxious, they ain't got no manners, not understanding what the root of the matter is. And right now we're having this conversation to really benefit the body of Christ, benefit us. How do we reach out to these young people that are just so hard to that it's so hard to get, answers from? What do we do?
I think it's in our approach to children. I think children are hesitant and they're really resistant when they feel like, you're coming to them and we're being judgmental. Or I think just reassuring them, that you love them, you care about their safety, you are just, concerned, and you want to make sure that they are taking precautions for themselves. I think the more and more you actively show that you are creating a safe space for them, the more and more that they are going to be willing to talk with you. If they do not feel safe with you, they are not going to communicate.
I hear that, but the issue is those individuals that preyed on them also built trust with them.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're saying, I allowed that person to get close to me. They took advantage of me. So how can I let anybody else get close to me?
Exactly. And that's when, it's important to really bring in a professional at this point, because that is one of the factors. One of the responses to abuse is you start to mistrust your own judgment. They say, I've made that decision before to trust a particular person that did this for me. I don't know if I can trust someone again. So you start to doubt your own judgment. Definitely, us as adults, educating ourselves, finding resources, being able to refer them for different treatment. But that is definitely a time that treatment is necessary.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good indeed. This has been happening from the time of creation through now. And let me say this, that it is going to continue to happen. The only thing we can do is to make sure that we educate our children and we try to get certain things over across to them. Okay, and that they can build that trust, and that trust is not violated.
Mm-hmm.
That is so important. Okay. Question number 2, and I'm sure that question number 1, we could spend at least another hour on question number 1, but because of time. Okay, Ebony, what are some of the indicators of a predator or abuser? Putting that to you first.
Okay, so some of the indicators, just as we discussed before, it can be anyone. It's usually someone that you are familiar with, but there are certain risk factors when it comes to sexual predators. So usually predators are people that have actually experienced abuse themselves. They may have experienced abuse or neglect as a child. It may be someone that has physical or mental illness, someone that's dealing with their own depression, stressors, financial strains, issues with alcohol and drugs. But it could be anyone, uncle, aunt, cousin, children that have been victims of abuse often victimize other children as well. About 36%, of sexual abuse is performed by other children. So it's important, just to be aware, have your children being aware, and keep that open dialogue between you and your kids.
So what you're saying in essence is that sometimes adults do it to children and children to children.
Yes.
That does happen. Okay, questions?
So, Ebony, I got to go back a little. I just got to back it up a little. So does that mean now I've got to be leery of my brothers, my uncles around my kids, my daughters? I got to be suspicious of everybody? Because that's a heavy load to carry.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I wouldn't necessarily say, you know, you don't want to live and have that fear constantly or be suspicious of everyone, but you do have to prep yourself and understand that anyone could be a perpetrator. So don't have that false sense of security, you know, and feel that, no, it can't happen to me. Because I think that's the time that you're at the most risk, when you think that it cannot happen to you. You know, this abuse can happen to anyone. And oftentimes, unfortunately, they are the ones that are closest to us. But definitely pay attention to those signs, you know, question things. If you feel like something is going on, you know, make sure you don't leave the room for them to be alone together, you know. Directly approach, you know, the person. A lot of times, you know, they're not going to be expecting, you know, you to come and approach them regarding the situation. So if there's a concern, you know, don't be afraid to approach the person that you feel may be performing this act.
Yeah, thank you.
And would you say, Ebony, that there are some people that do have a cognitive disorder, and they believe that every woman that they see who are dressed, I mean, provocatively, I mean, is really asking for something?
Yes, definitely. There are cognitive delays, definitely. Their thought processing is not, you know, on track in their concerns. I actually had a child offender say to me once that he was aroused by watching his 1-year-old cousin walk through in a diaper.
Mm.
So it's not necessarily, you know, the attraction and you wearing something provocative or things like that, but just that urge of a baby walking past in a diaper.
That person.
Isn't that a sick mind?
And that's really a cognitive disorder.
Yeah.
Definitely. Any other questions? If not, let's go on to question.
Well, I have a question when it comes to number 2, talking about signs of a predator. I don't want us to just kind of skip over this question and make it seem like the predator is someone who is this really bad person who's mentally deranged, because many times it's your brother. It's your sister. It's someone who you trust. It's someone who you love. It's someone who you would never think would do something like that. And so we need to make clear what a sexual predator is. And let's put it in layman's terms so that we're not demonizing it, but we're making it more realistic so that your mind can be wrapped around the fact that you need to be conscious and aware of who your children are with consistently. And a sexual predator is basically someone who has contact with someone or trying to get contact with someone who they're going to kind of exert their authority over, but in an abusive manner. And they may not or may realize that they're being abusive. They may just think they're being overly affectionate, or they may have a warped way of thinking that they love this person so much and not realize that they are a sexual predator. So there are some people that don't fit what we may think as cognitively crazy and, you know, the deranged person that you see on the news. It could be someone that you know in your everyday life. And as Ebony clearly said, it's normally people who you know. It's normally people who you contact every day, someone in your family, a relative, could be someone in your house, and they've had this opportunity to exert their power over this person right under your very nose. And it doesn't have to be a hated person. It could be someone that everybody loves. So we need to be clear on that. Be clear on that, because I don't want you thinking that you can be so comfortable with who you have your children around that you don't have to worry about anyone. No, you should always screen people, you know, never be so naive to the fact that we have an innate nature in us, that if the Spirit of God is not really controlling people, who's controlling them? that innate nature. And the heart of man is desperately wicked.
And that brings us back to the Roman Catholic Church, because listen, when it comes unto a priest, listen, this is a person that has a relationship with the man upstairs. So why shouldn't we trust a priest or a pastor or a bishop of a church? Are they deranged? Not really. But there's a weakness there that the enemy takes an opportunity to use. So as Dr. Heather said, it could be a brother, could be your sister, could be any individual that's around you that's looked up on.
Bishop, if I may, if I can chime in on what Dr. Heather was saying, one of the things I was thinking too, Dr. Heather, when you were talking about a sexual predator or an abuser, I see it as a person that just somewhere in their mind, they made up in their mind that they go and they sought after and they do something inappropriately, or they make that inappropriate contact. Because you're right, it doesn't have to be. My stepfather was known. It wasn't somebody that looked like he was crazy, but when he made that first attempt to touch me inappropriately, that's when he became a sexual predator in my eyes. That's how I saw it. Because again, looking at him, you wouldn't have never thought it. But what was going on behind doors when he made that first attempt, that's when he broke it. Yeah.
Still, don't we all have some type of weaknesses? We all have some type of weaknesses, and sometimes the weakness that you have, the other person does not have that weakness, and so forth. So we have to definitely look out for certain things. Any other questions, or would anyone like to say something about question number 2? What are some of the indicators of a predator or an abuser?
Well, Bishop, I shouldn't say most cases, but some people, when they think about a predator or an abuser, they think about a man. I know of a young boy that was molested by a grown woman. And as a result of that, he became promiscuous and turned into an alcoholic. So I don't want us to think that it's only men that does this. It's both genders.
Amen.
And it can happen to anyone.
Amen. Thank you for pointing that out, because so far the conversation seems to be going one direction. But thank you, Apostle, for making that known to us. Okay, question number 3. And I want to really direct this to Frank. Frank, is he on? Has he left us? Okay, I'm hoping that he will weigh in. Okay, based on your knowledge, what is normally the effects on the brain of someone who has experienced sexual abuse or trauma? Let me say that again. Based on your knowledge, what is normally the effects on the brain of someone who has experienced sexual abuse or trauma? And I'm going to ask anyone to weigh in on that until Frank comes back.
Well, I did some research too and wanting to know, because I kind of touched on it last week, because I had a picture of a child with a normal brain and then that of one that had trauma. And it was really interesting as I was reading today in talking about the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, right? And this was so powerful because I began to really look at this, like even in my own life as I was getting through this. And one of the things I read was that trauma can cause the limbic system to get stuck in a perpetual survival mode and see the world as being an unsafe place. And I thought that was so powerful because when you think of some areas, I'll speak for me, when I think of some areas in my life where I just felt stuck, that brings so much revelation to understanding that when that trauma took place in my life, in the way it affected my brain, that's where I stay stuck. And then another thing that I found out today says the instinctual limbic system will overpower the rational prefrontal frontal cortex and make a child feel unsafe constantly. And that's why I constantly talk about that feeling of feeling safe and understanding that the brain automatically, it goes into those different kinds of things because it's really trying to stay safe. So the brain really does get damaged. Basically, it gets damaged when you go through a traumatic experience in your life. That's why it's so important for us to talk about this. And I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of it.
So how would someone overcome that? How would someone really overcome that, Pastor?
It's going to take work. It really takes a lot of work because you're dealing with something that happened emotionally and of course physically, but that mental part of it, it takes work to come back and get through it. A lot of dialogue and a lot of talking and a lot of transfer, like taking that mind, because what the scripture tell us, being transformed by the renewing of our mind. You have to literally take your mind and allow it to be changed and be renewed again. You have to. And that's what I have to learn. And some little things I still learn to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Ebony?
It can be a lifelong process, really. And to follow up with what you were saying about the limbic system, basically, part of the brain, part of the limbic system is basically your amygdala and what's called your hypothalamus. Yeah. And basically, you're responsible for, it's a response system. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the fight or flight response. Yeah. So it's your brain's way of protecting you from situations. So it'll coordinate your response to a situation and either telling you to fight or run away from the situation to protect yourself, and basically boosting your adrenaline, changing your mood, your motivation, things like that. And as we talked about earlier, I think it was commented about you getting stuck in a state or having triggers that may bring you back to that event where you were being abused. So a trigger may be for it, whether it be someone that looks like the person that abused you. It could be a smell, it could be maybe someone was in the other room cooking pancakes, while you were being abused in the other room. So now you're sensitive to the smell of pancakes. So pancakes is a trigger for you. And each time you smell those pancakes, your body will go into that state of fight or flight. You're getting anxious, you're having breathing, issues, your heart rate speeds up, you're perspiring, things like that. So this will be a continuous response you're in, although you're no longer experiencing that abuse.
If I can piggyback off of what Pastor Price and Ebony are saying, scientists say that your biography in your early childhood really does become your biology. And so the very biology in your body changes to the point that your actual DNA can change, because scientists have found that fear, I love what Pastor Price said. I love her transparency. She's just such a powerful person. I love her spirit. What she said about living in fear, like the world, you become afraid of the entire world. That's actually biology. Because what happens is, go back to what Ebony said, scientifically proven. When your body lives in fight mode, your body reacts in a biological way. And so it's consistently arming itself, which affects the reproduction of your blood cells. And it actually causes you to develop inflammation. And it also causes you problems physiologically as well as psychologically. And so your biology begins to change based on the trauma that you experience as a child. And so that's why this conversation is so important, because there has to be healing to occur in order for you to heal yourself biologically. You have to heal psychologically. So this is an important conversation. Thank you, Pastor Price and Ebony.
Okay. And also, let me ask this question. What's the mental state of the abuser initiating the act of sexual abuse? What's his mental state? I mean, is he all there? I mean, how can you see a child 6 months old or 1 year old in diapers, and all of a sudden you get turned on?
Well, there's something that Ebony said that was really key to a big part of this conversation, is that many abusers were actually abused themselves. And so when they have been abused, their judgment towards who they can touch, who they can't touch, who does the touching. Remember, Ebony talked about the boundaries and that education about autonomy. Well, when someone has been abused and their brain has been altered, their biology and their body has been altered, their ability to make the right judgment call has been altered, it affects them. So what do they look like? It's not a matter of what they look like, but it's what has been altered in their brain to the point that now they can do something and not have remorse over it, because they have been so altered in their mind, they are confused as to what is appropriate behavior as opposed to inappropriate behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Amen to that. So therefore now, question, we're putting someone in office, and this came up before. Should we at least examine that they are all here? We're putting them in office. We are allowing them to be our senators. We're allowing them to become our priests, our judges.
Youth leaders.
So, okay. So it's like we are somewhat in trouble. We are somewhat in trouble because there again, a person may look harmless and has a position of respectability, and everyone looks up to that individual. But who knows what's going on up here? Ooh, certainly this is an unfriendly world. Let's just touch on this question. I know we don't have much time, but Ebony, when a sex offender leaves prison or is discovered to be a predator, are they subjected to mental treatment and evaluations, or are they left to themselves to break that cycle?
So yes, they are definitely subjected to treatment. So while incarcerated, inmates are actually, they participate in psychotherapy, cognitive behavior therapy, as well as group settings where they are basically urged to take accountability for their actions. And an important part of the treatment is them being able to be accountable for it, because lots of offenders will try and deny that there was any type of abuse or blame the victim as being the reason that they were abused. And when exiting the penal system, they use an assessment tool called the Static 99. And that basically is a risk assessment tool. It measures the long-term risk and rate of recidivism for offenders. So whether or not they are likely to repeat offend once they are released.
That's if the offender is caught and is put away.
Yes.
Oh, that's the thing. They're caught and they're put away. But the offenders that are still out there who have not being caught will continue to do it again and again, and the people that they have offended may become offenders themselves, and then the process starts all over again.
Exactly. And that's why it is so important that if we have any type of suspicion, to report it. It is so important that we teach our kids to, tell someone that we seek professional help, when it comes to this, because there's no way to really stop the cycle unless we're addressing the issue head on.
Mm-hmm. With all that we have said tonight, remember that our theme for this evening is grace and forgiveness. I mean, when you see an old man, 50, 60 years of age, seeing a child, 1 year of age in diapers and molest that child. Now, we are talking about grace and forgiveness. And let me say this, easier said than done. Easier said than done, because if this is your child, this happens to your child, and you know the perpetrator, ladies and gentlemen, it's hard to lay hands and to pray for that person. It's very, very hard. Most likely you'll be looking for a 2x4. If the truth be told, you'll be looking for a 2x4 to give it to them. And sometimes when you give it to them with the right hand, you give it to them also with the left hand. So how do you heal from something like this? Jean, you've been through it. My God, tell us, how did you come through it?
Wow, that's interesting. It's powerful, because in your humanity, you said it well, Bishop, you really want to hurt the person that hurt you. But when you become a child of God, and that's really the ultimate of everything, I think about what I want God to do for me. Like, think about forgiveness. Forgiveness is something that, and I was reading this earlier today, forgiveness is something that I intentionally made up in my mind to do. You don't have to forgive, but I had to forgive, because the unforgiveness was controlling my life. And I'm not trying to come off super spiritual, like I've always been there and I'm there now. What I'm saying is that it's the tool and the thing you need in order to keep going in the right path. I guess is what I'm saying. So forgiveness to me was intentional, and it was something that I wanted to do, not for him, but for myself. And when I needed God to forgive me the most in my life, I was able to withdraw from that because I forgave. Now, think about when you think about grace. Grace is the unmerited favor of God. It's the one thing that we feel that we don't even deserve. And in my humanity, did my stepfather deserve forgiveness from God? If I was in my humanity, I would say no. But think about it. I didn't always deserve God's unmerited favor and forgiveness as well. So for me, it was a stoppage in my mind and in my growth. And I determined in my heart and mind, I was going to grow over this, not grow through it, but grow over it. And when you grow over something, that means you're higher than what was trying to take you down. So that's how it was for me.
Did you go through any type of counseling before you got to that place?
I did. I did, sir, with my pastor. I did before she passed away. But I have to honestly say, even in counseling with her, I don't know if the error was, it just wasn't as in depth. And I'm just being totally transparent, as I would have liked it to be because of what I felt I went through. So a lot of my getting through was really, honestly, leaning on God. It really, truly was. And I don't fault her for that. She did the best she could for what she knew how to do. So I just had to really get through it, but really leaning on God.
Let me hear from Ebony Walker Sherless concerning this point. Ebony, how would you say a person should really get over this? Or can they ever get over this?
I think it's a continuous healing process. It can be a lifelong thing. And I think, victims have to actively make the choice, that they're not going to be a slave to their circumstance anymore, if you want to say. Really them working personally on not feeling that shame about themselves, understanding that they were in no way at fault. So they're not the one who needs to be forgiven for anything, that it is the perpetrator who has the sole guilt in the situation. And not really pushing them to forgive or forcing them to forgive. I look at forgiveness in the human aspect as different from the divine aspect. I think forgiveness is something that they'll have to deal with when Christ delivers his judgment, So in terms of, counseling, I never, really push, for that to be the focus of the healing process. If in time they come to that point, where they are willing to forgive their offender, then definitely that is great. But the focus is really to focus on their personal healing.
Okay, got you. Question, are there any tips, we can put forth to those who have been sexually assaulted? Any tips for the survivors? Any tips? What can we really say to a person that's been through it? We are talking to them. What tips can we put to them? People who have survived this or are going to survive this, what can we really tell them? I don't believe you, or can we tell them I believe you? Is it your fault or is it not your fault? You are not alone in this. What can we really tell them?
I think it's always important that, we should respond in belief. Initially, we are going to believe their report, offer our support, encouraging them, reminding them that we are going to be there for them throughout the process. And it is very important that we do not victimize them again by casting judgments, or casting any sort of blame in the situation. So just being there as much as we can.
Yeah. Because most of the time when this happens, and it happens by, like, say, a family member, and so forth, or somebody that you hold in high esteem, and so forth, and you're hearing this, it's like, no, it didn't really happen. It didn't really happen. You're just saying, you're lying. That happens all the time.
And I think part of us, you may realize that there is some truth to this, but you are in denial yourself.
Yes.
And that's the problem. The problem is too, we have to understand that these children are the victim. And lots of time when it comes to someone that's close to us, if it's a relative, or a close friend, we want to protect both parties. But we have to understand that the children should be our priority.
The children should be our
and their safety.
Amen to that. Well, we have heard a lot, and we definitely have said a lot. Dr. Heather Francis, after hearing and speaking, what do you think, young lady, we should take away from this conversation tonight?
Oh, wow. There's so much. Understand that nobody can treat a war victim or abuse or rape or molestation or any other horrendous event for that matter. What has happened, and it cannot be undone. However, you can find ways to deal with the fear and the trauma and the effect that has happened to your mind, your body, and your soul. And the first thing that you can do is learn to take ownership of your body and say, I now have control of my body. And that's something that women need to know. You've been through it. I know it's been rough, because 9 times out of 10, there is someone on this line or someone listening that has been abused, and they have not had the courage to say anything. But it's not too late. You can face it, as Pastor Price said, and start the journey towards healing with God on your side and your faith, because God said that He is a refuge to the oppressed in the time of trouble. Find a counselor, find someone who is educated to be there for you. Go through therapy and allow the Lord to be your rock, your shield, your hiding place. But most of all, He will renew your mind and your strength so that you can be the you that God has already ordained from before the foundation of the world. There's hope.
God. Amen. Certainly there is hope. Apostle Lucien Rojas, we have said a lot and we have heard a lot tonight. What should we take away, sir, from this conversation?
Well, we certainly live in a world that is sexual, and people have fantasies and strange thoughts, and but bringing awareness is so important. And I think molesting a child is such a dark place, and I thank God tonight that awareness is important. And one of the things, though, that I can see, even as the life of Pastor Price and many celebrities and people that come forth and talk about their experiences, is that, and I don't mean to give a spiritual answer, but with God, all things are possible. And he certainly can restore. You know, he can restore and he can heal and make whole. You know, there's hope. Yeah.
Thank God there is indeed hope. Pastor Richard Mackenzie, we have said a lot, we have heard a lot, but what should we take away from this conversation tonight, sir?
Yes, yes, sir. I would say that I and we have to do a better job of simply listening and refrain from judging. A lot of times we are very, very, very judgmental. We diagnose situations which are completely incorrect. But we should understand, especially from listening to the conversation tonight, that sexual abuse is real. The effects are real. The trauma is real. But the good news is that we also serve a real God. And with that being said, I would say to educate ourselves. And just like the MTA says, if you see something, say something, because literally a life is depending on it.
If you see something, then say something. Thank you very much, man of God. We want to thank God for Pastor Jean Price. Certainly, woman of God, you are an inspiration to many. I don't know how you did it. There are people that are on this planet who has not been through half what you have gone through, and they are in a mental institution, young lady. But I want to thank God for the grace of God, for the presence of God, and the fact that God has got you in the palm of his hands. And certainly, if it had not been for the Lord on your side, you would not be the Jean Price, the Pastor Jean Price that we know tonight. But thank God, with God, all things are possible. Woman of God, we've said a lot, we've heard a lot. What should we take away from this conversation tonight?
You know, I just wanted to reiterate again for those that are even listening. Two things came to mind, two words: safe, and just it's being safe, feeling safe, and also somebody knows that they're not in it alone. And I think when you feel like you're isolated by yourself, you're not so easily to come out and want to come out. So if I can just leave that with anybody tonight, please remind people that there is a safe place where they can go or find somebody safe that they can speak to about it. Because the secrecy is bad when it happens to you, but the secrecy is also bad when you hold on to it. So that can keep you really, really locked in. So being safe and understanding you're not alone. And I would like to leave those two things tonight.
You are not alone. Thank you very much, woman of God. Okay, we want to thank God also for Ebony Walker Sherless. That's with us. And we want to thank God for you indeed that came on with your expertise. Well, we have said a lot and we've heard a lot. Ebony, what should we take away tonight from this conversation?
I just want to stress that it is important to normalize discussion regarding sexual abuse, that we really need to talk about it more, educate one another more, and show up and support our victims.
Show up and support our victims. Thank you indeed. Thank you very much. Well, we just want to thank God for the panel tonight. We want to thank God for our guests that came on to assist us, amen, in this deliberation. One of the things I would like to close with saying is this, that every one of us, there are two things we all need. Number one, and it may sound a little whimsical, but we need a mirror and we need our shadow. We need a mirror and we need our shadow. A mirror always tells you the truth. A mirror always tells you the truth. And secondly, our shadow never ever leaves us. Well, thank God for God. God is like a mirror. He'll tell you the truth. And thank God that it was he who said, never leave you, never forsake you. I will be there even to the end. Oh yes, sexual abuse is something that many have experienced, but with God on our side, I am persuaded to say this, that we are all able to overcome. We want to thank God once again for Dr. Heather Francis that's with us. God bless you. Want to thank God for Pastor Richard Mackenzie, for the apostle. Thank God for Jean Price that came on. Pastor Price, God bless you, woman of God. And also Ebony Walker Sherless. I do know that Bishop Wolliston's on, but had to leave, and also our other guest. But thank you one and all for weighing in on the Bishop's Corner. By all means, see you next